The rain hit the pavement like thousands of tiny, frantic heartbeats, and in the middle of that gray, trembling afternoon, Mara Velen realized her life had turned into a quiet room where no one knocked anymore. At 49, she stood inside her small bakery, Sweet Ember, watching the condensation slide down the glass displays, her reflection wavering as though even the mirror hesitated to hold her. Everything felt fragile. Everything felt like it could collapse with just one more lonely day. And that was when the bell above the door rang, sharp and clear, as if striking the first note in a new, unexpected chapter. If you believe in kindness, second chances, and the beauty of unexpected connections, please like, comment, share, and subscribe to Kind Heart Stories. Your support helps more stories like this find the hearts waiting for them. Mara had opened Sweet Ember 10 years earlier, back when her marriage was whole and her dreams felt steady. She had imagined warmth and conversation, and people finding refuge in her pastries. But when her husband left 2 years ago, the bakery became quiet, and then quieter still, until she found herself working in the silence of her own fading confidence. Customers dwindled, her spark dwindled faster. She felt invisible, as though the world had carefully folded her into a corner and forgotten she was there. She carried on because she didn't know what else to do, because routine was easier than imagining a different life. That's why the sight of the young man stepping into her bakery that afternoon felt oddly significant. He wore a rain-darkened hoodie, his hair messy, his hands chilled red from the cold, and yet he smiled with the kind of sincerity that could cut through a storm. His name, as she would soon learn, was Rowan Eller, a 23-year-old culinary student who had stopped by only because he'd seen the help needed sign taped to her window. Mara had forgotten she'd taped that sign up 3 weeks ago. She'd assumed no one would bother applying. She tried to compose herself, forcing a polite smile, but Rowan studied her with a softness that immediately unnerved her. She didn't know why her pulse suddenly skipped. Maybe it was the way he stood steady, attentive, present, or the way he looked at her like she wasn't invisible at all. Rowan filled out the application at one of the small wooden tables, water dripping from his sleeves, and Mara found herself watching him even though she told herself not to. He seemed gentle, full of sincere curiosity, and she could see the brightness in him, the brightness she used to have. When he handed her the form, his fingertips briefly brushed hers, and something small and warm flickered under her ribs, like a forgotten candle relighting itself. She hired him on the spot. The next weeks passed with a strange, comforting transformation, slow, subtle, but impossible to ignore. Rowan arrived early every morning, always humming, always smiling, bringing a kind of youthful energy that blended with the calm warmth of the bakery. He learned quickly. He listened. He laughed easily, especially at her dry jokes, which no one had laughed at, not genuinely since before her marriage had fallen apart. There were moments when she caught him glancing at her, thoughtful and almost protective, and she wondered what he saw. She often avoided the mirror because the woman in it looked tired, lined, dimmed by years of disappointment. But Rowan looked at her like he saw someone else entirely, someone capable, someone warm, someone worth noticing. Sweet Ember began to fill again, not with crowds, but with small joys. New regular customers, fresh ideas for pastries, quiet companionship between two people working side by side. Mara found herself smiling more, not because she should, but because something inside her had begun to heal. Yet healing is rarely simple, and sweetness often grows beside fear. One morning, Mara overheard two customers whispering near the window, a mother and daughter who sat there often. They didn't notice her as they spoke. "It's nice she hired help," the mother murmured. "Bless her, but isn't he a bit young? Looks like he could be her son." The daughter giggled lightly. "Maybe he feels sorry for her. Poor woman always looks so lonely." Mara froze. An old familiar shame wrapped around her stomach. She retreated to the kitchen, washed her hands, though they weren't dirty, and stared at her reflection in the stainless steel counter. The whispering wasn't cruel, but it echoed her deepest insecurities, those she tried so hard to bury. She was too old for anything new. Too old for admiration. Too old for the warmth she felt every time Rowan smiled at her. She tried to distance herself after that, creating space with polite nods instead of genuine smiles, keeping conversations short even when Rowan's eyes silently asked what was wrong. But the more she pulled away, the more she realized how much brightness she had allowed him to bring into her life, and how deeply she feared losing it. One evening, long after closing, Rowan found her sitting at one of the small tables, staring at the cake she had spent hours decorating without realizing she'd overdone the frosting. She looked exhausted, restless, caught between wanting to cry and not having the energy for tears. Rowan stepped quietly toward her. He didn't touch her, didn't rush her, simply sat across from her with the kind of patience people rarely offered. "I don't know what I'm doing anymore," she whispered, surprising herself with the honesty spilling out. "Every day I feel like I'm slipping. Hearing people say I look lonely, that I'm too old to." She stopped herself, biting back the tremble. Rowan leaned forward slightly, his expression gentle but unwavering. "Too old to be seen? Too old to be valued?" He shook his head softly. "Mara, you're the strongest, brightest person I know. You just forget it sometimes." She tried to laugh, but the sound wavered. "Rowan, I'm nearly twice your age. I shouldn't be." She swallowed hard. "I shouldn't be relying on your presence for warmth." Rowan didn't move closer, but his voice grew quieter, deeper, as though he were speaking directly to the wound inside her. "You don't rely on me. We're just two people who met at a time when maybe we both needed something gentle." His words hit her with both comfort and ache. She wanted to believe him, but a lifetime of self-doubt clung stubbornly. She brushed the frosting on the cake absent-mindedly, whispering, "I can't expect anything from someone like you." Rowan's voice softened further. "Mara, the sweetness you bring into this bakery, into my days, it doesn't come from cakes or recipes. It comes from you. And I'm here because I choose to be. Not because of age, not because of pity, because you matter to me." Something inside her cracked at that, not in breaking, but in releasing years of heaviness. She didn't cry, though her chest swelled painfully with gratitude and fear and something that felt tender and new, though she wouldn't dare name it. They didn't touch. They didn't confess. They simply sat there, as the soft glow from the bakery sign illuminated the quiet space between them, an unspoken warmth neither knew how to describe. From then on, Mara didn't try to distance herself. Instead, she allowed herself to enjoy the small joys again, the laughter, the shared experiments in the kitchen, the feeling of belonging that slowly returned to her bones. She realized Rowan had not replaced her confidence, he had simply reminded her it was still there. But life has its own timing for tests. 1 month later, Sweet Ember faced a major setback when a nearby chain bakery opened, drawing away customers with flashy discounts and aggressive marketing. The slump hit hard, sales dropped, bills piled up. Mara stayed up late trying to find solutions, but exhaustion and fear gnawed at her. She began to think Sweet Ember was reaching its end, that all the small miracle moments she'd felt were just brief sparks, fated to fade. One morning, as she stood in the empty bakery, feeling the weight of defeat press sharply against her chest, Rowan walked in, carrying a stack of posters, bright, hopeful posters with the words, "Sweet Ember Community Day, fresh recipes, free samples, and warm stories." "I'm not letting this place fade," Rowan said firmly. "And neither are you." The event took days of preparation. Mara doubted it would help, but Rowan worked with a passionate determination that seemed to draw strength from the very soul of the bakery. Neighbors offered assistance, old customers returned with words of encouragement, and on the day of the event, Sweet Ember filled, bursting with people, laughter, warmth, and the kind of community spirit Mara thought she had lost forever. It wasn't a magical overnight transformation. The bakery still needed work, still faced challenges, still had slow days. But it lived again, and so did she. And through it all, Rowan stayed. Not because she needed saving, not because she was older, but because the sweetness he felt, genuine, deep, steady, came from her presence, from her kindness, from the quiet strength she didn't even know she radiated. Their connection remained gentle, unspoken, but unmistakably meaningful. The world might never understand it, and maybe that didn't matter. What mattered was that Mara learned to see herself through a new lens, not as fading, not as forgotten, but as someone capable of inspiring warmth in someone half her age, someone who saw her value long before she recognized it herself. If this story touched your heart, please like, comment, share, and subscribe to Kind Heart Stories. Your engagement helps these emotional journeys reach more people who need them. And before the ending, here is a special request. Please comment your favorite part of the story and what lesson you felt the most. Mara closed Sweet Ember one evening. The sky painted a mellow gold by the setting sun. She stepped outside with Rowan beside her, the warm breeze brushing past them gently. She didn't feel lonely. She didn't feel invisible. She felt alive. The sweetness in her life did not come from the cakes cooling in the kitchen. It came from rediscovering confidence, from unexpected companionship, from learning that age could never dim genuine connection. And as she walked down the sunlit street with Rowan, their steps in quiet harmony, she realized that the sweetest chapters in life often arrive long after we think the story is nearing its end.